Perfect. Good morning, folks. Can I get a good morning? I'm gonna need that a little bit louder. Yes, let's bring the energy. Thank you, guys. Buenos dias. I would like to first, start out with a thanks to Chief Lee Penny Wolf for your prayers, for your songs, and for really guiding us spiritually during this conference. I also really want to thank the farm workers who provided the food that we've been able to, sustain our bodies and our spirits today down in the dining hall. And also the YMCA staff members, the staff members for c&nn, who have worked really hard to put this event together. And most importantly, Lori, I'm looking right at you. I would love, love, love to give you a personal thanks from the bottom of my heart for really inviting us and believing in us and, giving us the space to share our stories. So thank you so much. Thank you. And with that, I'll pass it on to you, Kellie.
Thank you, Tyler. Good morning, everyone, again. My name is Kellie Berns. I go by she, her pronouns. I live on occupied Eastern Band Cherokee Territory in so-called Asheville, North Carolina, and I'm the International Program Director with Earth Guardians. I am a lover of nature and a lover of spirit, and I can't think of a better reason than to be together today than to reconnect people back to nature and get people in nature. So with that, I want to thank first the tribal nations of this land, the Ute, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne. Thank you for your love, your power, for allowing us to be here. Thank you to the Pisces Foundation for funding this event, for putting your resources into what I think is one of the most critical issues of today, which is, again, just getting people reconnected to nature. We have a saying at Earth Guardians that you protect what you love, and if you don't know nature, you can't love it. So thank you, and thank you to the Children's and Nature Network for your work, and once again for bringing us together on this critical cause. I am going to take a second to introduce Earth Guardians, give you guys a little bit of history, and then I am going to pass the mic to our youth leaders here. Earth Guardians was founded in the early 90s as an accredited high school in Maui, Hawaii, to teach youth about environmental direct action. In the late 90s, the Dalai Lama gave the organization the Torch of Hope, and youth went to 26 different states and spoke to different panels, the UN, different audiences about the impending climate and environmental crisis. That torch ended up in Mexico City, where it's still lit to this day with the indigenous people of that area. In the early 2000s, the founding family of this organization moved to Boulder, Colorado, and started to do direct action in Boulder. They got pesticides banned in parks. They got a moratorium on fracking. They started a lawsuit against the United States government. And the media started to catch wind. And at that point, youth from across the world started asking, how do we do this? How do we do the same thing in our communities? And that started our Cruise program, which is our program that supports young people across the world getting engaged at the intersections of environmental, climate, and social justice. We are like an inspiration. We're like a spark. And we really encourage our youth to start these groups. We support them with various resources, financial, educational, networking, to then go out into their communities and affect local, international, and national action via everything from nonviolent direct action, fossil fuel resistance, divestment, waterways cleanups, plastic campaigns, artivism, and the list goes on, tree planting, mass tree planting, permaculture. And with that, I want to just invite everyone to get a little uncomfortable with today's talk. Some of the things we talk about might rub you the wrong way, but consider yourself a rock that's getting rubbed up against what some of our speakers might be saying to come out a gem, to come out polished. I want to also say that this is our staff. We have a couple more staff members that aren't here. We really try to walk our talk. I'm the only seasoned youth adult ally here on staff at this point. So this is our staff. And with that, I will pass the mic for them to introduce themselves, name, pronouns, where you're from, and anything else you want to share about why you're here.
Cool, so I'll start. So in case you didn't catch earlier, my name is Tyler Massias. I'm from DC. My pronouns are he, they. I should actually specify. I was born and raised in the Bronx of New York City, moved to Connecticut, then moved to DC. So I've been quite a few places on the East Coast, so I'm an East Coast lover. some brief background. Yeah, I'm studying my master's in environmental science and policy. I'm an academic, love to write, love to learn, learner for life, right? I'm also a farmer, so I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I do enjoy getting my hands in the dirt quite often and sharing that wisdom with others. It's so critical to what we're talking about here, today at the conference. And I mean, Lori and I have also had those conversations too, so it's something sweet to share. But yeah, I'll pass it on to the next person.
I keep forgetting I have my own mic. I'm like ready to take yours from you. Hi, everybody. I'm Emmy Scott. My pronouns are she, they, z. I graduated from the University of Northern Colorado, so just right around the way in Greeley. Ooh, any Greeley folks? Yes, with that one. Yay. So I graduated from the University of Northern Colorado, where I achieved 2 degrees, one in business management and another in environmental studies. My freshman year of college, I was deep into environmental studies, and I had the chance to take an economics class. And in this economics class, I learned that the world is pretty much ruled by money, right? And so that was when I decided to add a double major and absolutely annihilate my mindset by taking 21 credits a semester. And then after that, during my time in school, I actually got to lead an Earth Guardians crew. I had the honor of being able to serve a crew and be able to do local on-the-ground actions in Greeley, Colorado. If any of you guys are familiar with Greeley, Colorado, it's quite a conservative town, so it was really amazing that we had that presence there, and not only a presence, but we really got the community involved and mobilized them. We had tons of people come up to us after events and say, hey, I work in the oil fields, but I want to sign your petition because we believe in what you guys are doing, and we believe that there is possibility for just transition. So to be able to get that perspective from people who had such opposite values from me was really, really valuable in my life. And I think I've held that in all of my work since then. So after school, I had the honor of being hired as the operations director for Earth Guardians. And just recently, I got promoted to the executive director. So yes, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you all. Yes, I'm now the youngest executive director Earth Guardians has ever had, so it's an immense honor.
¿Es this on? Buenos días. Buenos días. Sorry, I got confused. My name is Tony, and I come from the ancestries of the Choroteca people, which is towards the north of Costa Rica, and then the Huetar people, which is to the center of Costa Rica, or like today at least what is so-called Costa Rica. And I was born and raised in the unceded land of the Huetar people, which is my grandma's people, in the coastal city of Punta Arenas. So that's to the Pacific coast. I'm very sure many of you may have been already to Costa Rica, because people from the US just love going to Costa Rica, to say the least. Some of them love to gentrify the country, to say the least, too, right? Again, getting into the discomfort. But I also serve as the regional director lead at Earth Guardians, and I have also just finished my master's degree in applied diplomacy with a concentration in migration studies. I'm also the first person on both families to have a master's degree ever. So, thank you. Thank you, and I'm really honored, right? I think that when Renee and Alicia yesterday were speaking about the people that have come before you, and then you being a future ancestor, that's really where I see myself, and that's really also what I was taught from being a little kid. And I think that that is also something that I hope people can really take away from this conference, and like also spread it with your loved ones and your communities. My pronouns are he, him. I didn't say that at the beginning. I love nature, so I think I've been having some conversations too about how, like, coming from Costa Rica, we can't really separate nature from humanity. And so I was just having a conversation really short here with Melissa today for the introduction, like the icebreaker this morning. And to me, you know, that's like very important, because I think that a lot of what we believe in too is how that disconnection of humanity from nature has been extremely intentional and extremely purposeful. And for me, coming from two very different cosmovisions in Costa Rica, which is a country where only 2.5% of the population is indigenous, which is one of the lowest in Latin America. It's very important to combine that, to combine what my grandfather is teaching me and on my dad's side, and to combine what my grandma is teaching me on my mom's side. So I'm really thankful for everybody to being here, for the event organizers, for the Children and Nature Network, and also the sponsors, to bring people here, but also to be really intentional that when we have these spaces, when we talk about nature, we also need to bring the right people to the table. And a lot of the time, that also means having diversity in the room and sharing that power and decision making with the diversity in the room, and having that possibility to go to a panel where people are Black, where people are brown, where people are indigenous, and not the other way around. Because we know that when we experience, specifically from my perspective and cosmovision as an indigenous person from the Global South, we know too that climate change is not an issue that the Global South, or more so indigenous people, caused. So we have the solutions out there, and I'm here, gonna close this up now, but we'll get more to that. So I'm super excited and super thankful for also everybody sitting here at the table, and everybody, literally everybody who's come before us, and everybody who will come after us too.
Imanaya, Nyokak Sutin, Mayak Chura Chipana, Sumat Punchai. Hi, good morning. My name is Mayak Chura Chipana. And before I introduce myself, I just want to recognize and acknowledge the elders, my elders sitting in the crowd and listening, and also the people whose traditional homelands that we've been organizing and sharing and living these past 3 days. Well, I've been here for 3 days. Yeah, I want to recognize those people. So, like I said, my name is Maya, and I am a Quechua Warmi, a Quechua woman. My mother is from Argentina, who's mixed descent, European, Italian, Spanish, and some Jewish. And then my father, on my father's side, were Quechua, and that's pretty much all that we know. My grandmother and my grandfather didn't speak Spanish, and my father didn't speak Spanish until he was 16 years old. So I'm Quechua, and that's, as my children and my grandchildren will always be Quechua. That's our lineage. And I am here today with Earth Guardians, and I'm recently, actually, I graduated already. I was kind of laughing to myself because that slide's a little bit old, but it's okay. So I graduated my master's from New Mexico, and I've been working with Earth Guardians pretty much since just before I started my master's program, working with the Indigenous Youth Initiative. We organize youth trainings specifically by and for Indigenous youth throughout Turtle Island and also throughout South America. And our next one's coming up in October, but we usually do them in the summer. So this will be my third training that we organize, including the first one being virtual because it was during COVID. And I'm also recently the communications director, so I handle the Instagrams, all the social media stuff for Earth Guardians. And since I've graduated from college, from university, I actually have moved from New Mexico to Ecuador. So right now I live in Ecuador. I just flew in from Ecuador. I have some family there as well. And I did forget to mention, sorry, there's always something we forget, that my pronouns are she, her, and I am born and raised in currently occupied Lenape-Hoking, so New York City. So I'm born and raised in New York City. So I pretty much just kept on going more south. So I was from New York City, then I went to New Mexico because I also have relatives there. I have relatives in Arizona, so I wanted to be closer to them and study in New Mexico. And then I just kept on going south. Now I'm in Ecuador, and I probably will be in Bolivia with more of my family. So I just keep following my heart and the prayer, and that's where it is for me. But throughout all of these moves, I've been with Earth Guardian, so I'm actually really grateful to be doing not just work that I love, but work with people that I think appreciate and look out for youth, indigenous youth, and Black youth. And I'm really grateful to have had some of the conversations that we've been having the last few days. And thank you for everyone who has traveled. I know it's not easy. I had to take 2 planes and a long bus right here, and I know a lot of us had to take long journeys. So I just want to say also, when we go back home, cedar down, prayers down for a safe journey back home. And yeah, thank you. Bachi.
So maybe you guys are feeling it. We are a family up here as well. I feel blessed and honored to be with each one of them. And as you can already tell, they hold a lot of knowledge and wisdom at a young age and a lot of love. So with that, to bring it back to the essence of this conference, as youth, what got you involved in the environmental and ecological movement, the climate justice movement? And whoever wants to start, please go ahead.
I'll start. So one thing I also forgot to mention is I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. Any Arizonians in the crowd? Woo! Okay, more than Greeley. So I was born in Arizona, born and raised, and then took 5 years to go to school in Colorado. But growing up, I was really close with my grandparents, and my grandpa in particular is a nature lover just by default. He never was an activist. He never went to college for, biology or anything. But to this day, if you walk outside with him or take a hike with him, he will point at any plant and tell you exactly what it's called, exactly where it originated from, if it's native or if it's, an invasive species. He tells me how to use the plants. So he's just really knowledgeable about nature, and he passed that knowledge on to me. And as I got older, I realized that people who look like me, my BIPOC counterparts, didn't have the same access to nature that I had. So I went camping a lot, I fished, I went on hikes constantly. And a lot of my friends, especially my Black friends, had never even been in the forest like that before. They've never been outside of the city. And so that was when I became really passionate about getting access to nature and ensuring that people that look like me had that access, because it was just an undeniable connection that I had to nature because I was exposed to it. It wasn't like something that I was called to or this big, catalyst moment for me. It was just the fact that I had grew up touching grass. And so I knew when I got older, I wanted to make sure that those who came after me had that same opportunity. I think if there was like a catalyst moment, there was once me and my grandpa used to go up to this spot all the time in Arizona to go cliff diving and drink spring water. And when we had went up there in my teenage years, I went to go fill up the bottle in the running spring, and my grandpa was like, "Oh, no, like absolutely not. The water is toxic now. We can't drink it anymore. Like even though it's running water, it's no longer clean, and I don't want you drinking it." And that was a moment for me where I was just like, wow, just 10 years have gone by, not even. And now this water is toxic. We can't drink it. And I think that moment for me was one of the reasons why I'm in the ecological movement. One of the reasons why I fight for the environment is because I don't have a choice. If we don't fight for our environment, we're not going to have an environment. And, we all know nature will persist after us, but don't we want to be a part of it? Don't we want to be on this beautiful journey? I think it's like a blessing, not like a blessing. It is a blessing, this earth that we have. It's unique, it's special. We know this by science, you know. So I think that was one of the big moments for me that really got me involved, was just seeing that even the access that I had to nature was diminishing. And so that's really our goal as Earth Guardians, is to make sure youth get out into nature, and then we'll have abundance of resources for generations to come, so they don't have to endure the same things that we're having to do right now. I really hope that the next generation is not still fighting the same fight that we're fighting, that it's solved and we're able to, you know, thrive as a community. So, yeah.
Thank you, Emmy. I agree with what Emmy's saying. I think that access to nature is very important, you know, and again, for me, it is very different because like coming from Costa Rica is something that is mostly given. Of course, there are still inequalities that persist and people who do not have access to nature, but I mean, having access to nature is one thing, and actually understanding nature is a very different thing. So I think that, you know, for me, you know, it really is hurtful when people go to national parks in Costa Rica and like throw their litter around or like are feeding animals, you know, and like I think a lot of the conversations that we have really have that we have really had, no, that we have really have, whatever, the conversations that the conversations that we have, you know, specifically within Earth Guardians, you know, and tourism specifically, and the climate movement, is that you have a responsibility to anywhere you go when it comes to nature. You know, I think that for me, it is like I found myself in so many places at home where like I'm telling a tourist, please do not feed the monkey, like please do not feed the raccoon. And they think it's cool, they think Instagram is liking it, and probably it is, you know, but I ain't liking that. My grandma is not liking that. Like we don't want the raccoon to come back into our home and steal our food, you know, and like that's the same, you know, like, we take that access at times so much for granted, which is one thing, but then we do not understand the complexity of nature itself. And I think that's also, you know, for me, from my own background, something that really got me more into the climate movement, specifically as I moved here for school, and understanding that people also should be hearing that connection. People should be learning about what that means. And I think that's something that I also want to emphasize as somebody who is of indigenous descent, but I was not born or raised in the indigenous territories like my grandfathers, like my grandparents, or my father. So I was still, you know, able to carry and learn a lot from that. And I think that's something that my grandma has really taught me. And really, I owe my life to women. And I think, like, for anybody here who is a woman, identify as a woman or is femme, like, I really want to acknowledge that too, you know, in honor of where I'm from, that the teachers, the people who were leading the community, the people who were making decisions, the people that were providing, in my case, were mostly always women. And one time I asked grandma, I was like, you know, abuela, like, why is this happening? Like, why, like, do we have to deal so much with BS? You know, because that's the truth. You know, like, why do we have like why do I have to deal with this teacher? Why do I have to deal with this professor in school? Like, what's going on? You know, and she told me, I was like, why do I have to be the one who speaks up? You know, why is nobody else speaking up? You know, and so she said to me, and she was like, Tony, as an indigenous person, you are born an activist. You know, and I think that, you know, that really, I think that was really profound. You know, I do not mean to carry that responsibility, and I do not think indigenous people need to carry that responsibility, but I think it made sense. You know, there was a part of that that was so truthful, and that has always been so natural to me, to speak up, to not conform, that I was like, wait, I was like, Grandma, that makes sense, you know, and it makes sense, you know. But so for me to being part of this movement, and what got me into it is very much coming from that descent, you know, being a protector, being a water protector, being a land protector, being somebody whose life is literally at risk and threatened every day in a system that is very oppressive, because you are standing for the water and for the land that is not yours, it's everybody's. You know, it's not even everybody's, like it's itself, you know, it's just for everybody to have access to it. So to me, you know, and to finish here, you know, to me, being in the ecological movement, I don't have like a specific event that is like boom, like I had like in Catholic terms, an epiphany, you know, like I didn't have that, you know. It really is my day to day, and it really is that before I was even born, that's how my elders, that's how my ancestors lived by. So for me, being part of this movement is natural, but it can also be heavy at times, you know, and it's not something that I mean to keep leading myself only, but really to keep informing and sharing and leading with everybody else, and at times, of course, stepping back. So again, you know, being part of this climate movement is being present, being informed, being definitely radical, but also knowing that there are times when somebody else needs to do the work.
Okay. Yeah, I resonate a lot with what both Emmy and Tony were just sharing. I think for me, I did have, although I do resonate, but I do have a moment that I can recall where I think it opened my eyes a lot. Not to say that before this moment I never thought about Mother Earth, because I also, being an Indigenous woman, and even though I was born and raised in New York City, which is one of the biggest cities in the world, my father and my mother always, from birth, you know, told us stories of with my grandmother and my grandfather and our aunties, and we'd always have like Andean like cosmovision present from our household from birth. For example, we were never allowed to throw away food, which is something that I think United States, they do that sometimes, which I don't understand. But like, even though I was raised with all that and such, I do remember the first time my father brought me to Bolivia, to his hometown, which is in the Altiplano, in the Andes Mountains, which is very similar to the Rockies. I actually feel like really at home here, because the Rockies is I was reading that the Rockies is the longest mountain range in North America, and the Andes is the longest mountain range in South America. And I think it's connected. That's just me. And so where my family's from is from the Andes. They're people of the mountains and the desert mountains. So it's not as green where my father's hometown is. But when I went there with my dad the first time, I was about to be 15, which in like also like in South American culture, like that's a very like meaningful age, because it's pretty much like from girlhood to womanhood. It's like around the time that women get their moon first time, or a little bit before, but it depends. And when I went there, I was like I mentioned, like I was very a New Yorker, like I was a New Yorker. But I went there and we stayed there for like 2.5 weeks, in literally the house where my father and all of his siblings were born in. Like that's where my grandmother had all of her children. Some of them even passed away when they were babies, because there's no like healthcare there. There's no hospitals there. And there was no running water, no electricity. We had to go catch our own water, which, if you're not familiar with that term, but that's like when you go to the river with buckets and you bring the water so you could drink it, because the water is still drinkable there, because that's how like untouched that area is. And we'd have to cook with fire, and we have to do things that are actually what makes us human, like very simple things, but it occupies your whole day in a way. You clean clothes, you catch water, you make food, you clean up, you feed the animals. Over there's tons of llamas, so it's like you see more llamas than people in my dad's town. And for me, it was just, I don't know if it was an epiphany, because I think that it is also like a little bit of like a churchy, like, whoa, like I saw this. But I do think that it was like a way where I realized, or I understood like what creation and what like speaking to creator is, because I remember looking at the sky, and especially at night, because Bolivia has some of the highest places in the world, in the entire world, some of the highest points. And I remember at nighttime, I literally felt like I can like take my hand and just grab a star. And I felt like that was like my grandmother's blanket of like over me, like the blanket of stars was just like putting me to bed, because it was so cold. Like it's really hot during the day and really cold during night. And that's what I felt what that blanket of stars was to me. And I think when I just came from that experience, I realized that Mother Earth is taking care of us every single moment of the day. And she's alive, and the mountains and the stars and everything, the water, the rivers, it's all part of this creation that is constantly mothering us and taking care of us. And at the same very time, it's the same mother that took care of my ancestors. And that's when I realized that it's something that's holy, that's sacred, that I have to take care of, because that's like where my ancestors are as well. They stay here because they were taken care of here. And then yeah, that's why I say that it was a pretty big awakening, because I think in New York City I didn't have that sort of connection. And I think just having to do those things that my grandmother, my grandfather, and my aunts had to do, like take the llamas out and do things like that, I think it made me realize like how powerful we are as well, and how much we can do, like if we want to change something, like we can, because like once we communicate and live with the earth, like I think we become pretty powerful, and especially as indigenous people, because we have like all of those prayers and all of that history with us. And then when I came back to New York, like maybe shortly after, like maybe that was like 2 or 3 years after, like I think in my first year of undergrad in New York, and that's when like the Standing Rock movement happened. And I think that I don't think that I was like, oh, this is like the environmental movement. I think that like I knew at that point what it was. Like I don't think that was like my introduction, but I do think that that was like in my generation, like the first time where I saw so many like people of all different ages and generations like coming together for water, like not for anything else, like not for money, not for reputation, not for like ego, not for like status, like just for water, at least in North America. And I think that was like a really powerful moment that at least a lot of people in my generation like felt like alive and powerful during. So yeah, but also before, and I do want to say that the being part of the ecological movement or being environmentalist, whatever that means, I think that it's ever evolving, because I feel like more and more you see things that open your eyes more, and you just become like a little bit like smarter, or you just see more things. And recently, like I mentioned when I was speaking before, like I moved to Ecuador, and just before I end, because I don't know how long I have, but I think that being closer to like where food actually comes from, and not buying your food from a supermarket where it was shipped like thousands of miles away, or in a plane, in a truck. I think for me, that's like where the ecological movement, and for me personally, that's where it really is at, when it comes to like what we consume and what we farm and yeah, what we put on our plates and our bodies. And so I think that in the United States, it's not impossible, but it's really hard. And I see in South America, there's still like that pretty strong connection. For example, really quickly, I keep talking, but every time there's like a protest, like they'll just, like the farmers will literally cut the roads off, and then they'll be like, no more food for the city. And that's how they make their point. I think that's pretty powerful. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
I suppose my case is slightly similar. So I just remember having this really clear and fond memory of moving from New York City to Connecticut. And that was like the first time I ever saw a cow, and I saw pastures, and I was like, oh my God, it's a cow! Like, how cool is that? No, and like, I don't know, I feel like that amazement has stuck with me up until this very point. And I mean, even since I was like a little boy, I was very interested in animals. I love nature, and I always wanted to get out. And now I'm happy to say that, I mean, as a grown adult, I'm able to explore more, given the resources that I have. For instance, I love to ride horses. Western, we don't do English in here, y'all. But yeah, so I mean, that was kind of a personal anecdote from my childhood, but politically or socially speaking, what really called me to this movement was bearing witness to the inequities, right? And the injustices that were being committed against this planet, the exploitation, the extraction, seeing that in the news, seeing that in social media, hearing about that from your friends, and even your own lived experiences, right? So, I mean, I thought to myself, I cannot sit here idly by, be indifferent and allow this to happen. And at the same time, I'm sure we've also witnessed plenty of role models, Black, Indigenous, and otherwise, who are speaking, truth to power, going to the White House, going to Congress, going to the United Nations, going to your neighbors or your community center, your library, and really speaking up and making sure that our voices are actually not only being heard, but folks are truly deeply listening, critically listening, and also building off of the things that we're saying. I mean, so that's one aspect. But another aspect of that was that I did find myself for a really long time deeply entrenched in many, many youth movements, especially around 2018. So with March for Our Lives and the Sunrise Movement, and I even started my own organization as a response to what I felt like was something was intrinsically missing. Something was missing. And I needed to take a break, I needed to stop, and I needed to really reflect on what that was. And so during that time period, like I said, I started an organization called Unity Coalition Movement to really expand upon my agricultural work in the DMV area, which I'll touch upon in a minute too. But I don't know, I felt like our voices as BIPOC and low-income communities were not being heard in these organizations, and that someone also had to rectify what is being called the ecological movement, right? And putting that on a right path towards some serious reparative justice. So, I mean, after all of that, I got the chance to work with mutual aid organizations. Funny enough, Twitter was actually really instrumental to connecting me with one of my favorite farmers, Marcus Robertson of Woodbox Farms in Virginia. It was actually so random how we met. So, I mean, just like 3 years ago, I would have never guessed that farming or agriculture would be something that I was interested in. So it kind of fell into my lap. But at the same time, it was always a core part of who I was, my family, and also where they came from. So, I mean, I guess I can talk on that a little bit more too. So my family is from Jamaica, which is an island in the Caribbean rich in culture. And I mean, throughout the years, it's not difficult to see how climate change and the symptoms of climate change are impacting small island developing states. And quite a few of us are from the Caribbean or Latin America here, even North America. These things are very clear to us. So I mean, that really brought it to the forefront for me because I take my own personal history very seriously. So I mean, when something's, effing around with my people and my family, I'm gonna hop on that, right? But I mean, the other part of that is also growing up on the East Coast and bearing witness to the ever increasing intensity of hurricanes, blizzards, and drought really made that serious for me as well. And even just last week in DC, from New York City to DC, I mean, the entire East Coast was covered in smoke. The air quality was absolutely terrible. I'm sure many of you have seen the pictures or heard the stories in the news. So once again, really pressuring us to really think critically and think deeply, even the origins of our actions, of what we're doing and our interactions and our relationship with Mother Earth. So I hope we're all taking the time to reflect on that, right? Planning on what we're gonna do next, right? You guys don't seem too confident. But I mean, hopefully after this talk, we can get some juice flowing for y'all.
I think they're just tired.
They're just tired?
You guys tired?
You tired?
I see some dozing off out there.
Guys, we got to get them some coffee, Lori. But yeah, so thank you for allowing me to share that part.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Thank you all. So, Tyler, why don't you keep that mic in your hand and talk to us about what it means to you to be radical in this movement, and then everyone can follow.
So yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting term, right? Being radical in a time of, well, are we being radical now? I mean, that's something to reflect on too. But it means so many different things to me. I mean, being radical, I mean, first and foremost, always means recognizing that racial justice is environmental justice, and environmental justice is food justice. They are not mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, they're inextricably linked in a very, very deep connection. And I think we need to all be paying attention to that, right? So the other part of that, I guess I would say is, I mean, and I'd like to talk about this a lot, but I think we really, truly, I mean, look at the times that we're living in. We really, truly need to be developing a radical, holistic perspective of the ecological challenges at hand, right? So that we can deal with these issues accordingly, properly, and appropriately. Because right now, in my personal opinion, things are very biased or one-sided, or we're missing pieces in a whole puzzle that we need to figure out. So really getting together and having those conversations, right, is also radical. Sharing space is radical. And talking these things through, because at the end of the day, we don't know all the answers. And I mean, the only way we can derive the answers and the solutions we seek is together, and also creatively. Another thing I would say is being radical also means daring to reach out to Mother Earth, right? And actually working to establish a relationship with the land. I mean, that's something that I do with farming, but you can do that in so many other different ways. And I mean, I'm not saying that's easy, because it's easier said than done, given certain distractions like social media or the internet, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, what have you, TikTok. We always want to be on our phones, right? We never want to be out in the outdoors and actually interacting with the land. And I mean, really think on that. How does that make, our planet feel? And then as a result, how does that, make our own selves feel? Like, let's really get into those emotions and unpack that mentality as well. Another thing I would say is that I'm really on a list here, but being radical also means seed keeping, and seed keeping is a very, very strong principle and facet of the Black agrarian tradition, and also something we share with our indigenous brothers and sisters as well. So really holding on to and ensuring the preservation of culturally appropriate heirloom seeds, meaning heirloom, when I say heirloom, I mean they are close as possible to their genetic heritage without the presence or the interference of genetic modification. We're talking about the crops and the seeds that we were dealing with hundreds to thousands of years ago that are deeply entrenched in our cultures. We deserve access to those seeds immediately, right? We have a right to those seeds. They're just as much a part of us as anything else. Yes. And on the topic of seed keeping, as I'm sure you may know by now, I do a lot of farm work with the Ujamaa Cooperative Farming Alliance in Maryland. I'm gonna do a little side note here. Ujamaa is the fourth principle of Kwanzaa, referring to cooperative economics, right? So how are we actually working together as a community to build collective wealth? And that's exactly what our cooperative is doing. And I mean, take another note. This cooperative is predominantly Black and indigenous as well, and one of the largest seed providers, heirloom seed providers on the East Coast. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Neat, right? Yeah. So, I mean, given that fact, I really just want us to take a step back and really hone in on the essence of injustice in this situation, right? So in this country alone, just in the past century, just in the past 100 years, we have seen Black land tenureship drop from 14% in, say, 1920 to 1% today. Does that sound okay to anyone in here? Does that sound good to y'all? No, I didn't think so either. Now, take into account another fact here. Bill Gates is the largest owner of farmland in the United States. Really, let that sink in. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. And so I'll say that this drop, I mean, is obviously credited to, predatory lending and direct interference, from the United States government, who did not and does not wish to see the liberation of Black and brown peoples. Let's really, that is not me being hyperbolic, that is a historical fact. I mean, let's look at what's going on today. I don't think we need to even get into that anymore, right? But I just think that's such a funny thing. And then also on the Bill Gates issue, he's not even a farmer. What is he doing with all that land? What is he doing with all that land? But being radical in this movement means addressing that history and the injustices of today while recognizing that Black and indigenous agricultural techniques are beneficial not only for our local ecosystems, but they also largely mitigate the symptoms of climate change. That is one bright and clear solution. Why aren't we investing in our local, Black and indigenous farmers? Why are we giving our money to Giants or Stop and Shop or what have you? I don't know what supermarkets y'all have down here. I'm not from here, so but you get the point. I think we also need to really compare that to the food systems of today, right? We're living in a system where everything is monocultural. Everything is the same as cookie cutter, cut and dry, and it's heavily extractive to our local ecosystems. We cannot allow that to continue to happen. Are we going to allow that to continue to happen? No. Thank you. I'm liking the energy. It's getting better. But to be, able to be in a space where I'm able to learn past and new wisdoms from our elders and also from one another is so critical in this case. I mean, recognizing that our ancestors have deliberately left behind wisdoms to help guide us on our time here on Earth Sometimes, I mean, let's come to the conclusion. Sometimes the past isn't as dull as we want to make it out to be. The past literally holds the keys to the solutions that we are seeking to build a better future for us all. Thank you. Thank you. We simply have to be willing and able to listen. And I feel like we all have a very big problem with listening and taking accountability, but we'll get into that in another thing. And lastly, I'll say this, I'm sorry for taking up so much time, but being radical in this movement also means, loving yourself and putting yourself first. I mean, without you, there is nothing, literally. You're living your own experience on this earth. And also, I mean, the other half of that is building your communities and circles on values of compassion, community, care, empathy, reciprocity, as opposed to extraction, exploitation, violence, things that we're seeing going on today in our communities. And so, I mean, I will end here. I want you guys to think on some questions. So how do we challenge ourselves to be courageous enough to imagine or to reimagine new systems, new ways of living, new worlds, and how do we do it creatively and collaboratively? Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler, for that. I'm happy that people seem more in high energy. I know that sometimes we start like low energy, and then when we hear like truth after truth, it's like, okay, yes. I really was looking forward to this question. I think that there's definitely different ways, different forms, different ways of being radical. Definitely food. I mean, that farming, farm rights, farmers' rights, that is definitely one. Actually, I wanted to specifically, while I'm answering this question, if that's okay, point out, I think I have four instances that have happened that for me are revolutionary and brave and radical acts, and radical and brave and revolutionary people. One being in Atlanta, Cop City, when Tortuga, I just wanted to say his name because this was a farmer that was killed by the police. And I think part of being radical is recognizing and calling out the police force and militarization that is always putting down and violently oppressing brown and black people. And Tortuga was someone who was a brown farmer, and he was shot down. And I just want to call that out. And Cop City actually was a prison farm previously, and it was the original territories, and it was by Atlanta, but original territories of the Muskogee people in the South River Forest near Atlanta. So I wanted to call that out because for me, I think that was, for me, an embodiment of what it is to be radical, to stand up, not even for oneself, but Tortuga stood up for the forest people, and for the waters of the forest, and for the trees. So for me, that is a true forest guardian and forest protector. I also wanted to call out what happened in January, which for me really touched my heart just this last January, 4 months ago, in the Brazilian Amazon, with the Yanomami people. The Yanomami reservation is the largest indigenous reservation in the Brazilian Amazon. It's the size of Portugal, so pretty large. The Amazon is very large. And pretty much, if people are not aware, the previous president of Brazil was Bolsonaro, which he was terrible. Yeah, boo, a huge boo for Bolsonaro, because he would say a little bit I think it was kind of what Trump did in the United States, just say these very outrageous statements of how he wanted to literally wipe out indigenous people and indigenous territories so that he can improve Brazil's economy with using the land, the farmland and the land in the Brazilian Amazon. And in January, I was getting to, it's really, really sad, but the Yanomami people were found, dozens and dozens of people found malnourished and starving. I'm talking about children, women, men, families, children. And for me, this really struck a chord because I visited the Amazon. I've been in the Peruvian Amazon. And when you're in the Amazon, if you spit a seed out, something will grow. So for children to be found hungry, like people in general to be found hungry in a place where literally anything can grow, that's when you know there is a problem. There's a huge problem. And I think radicalism means calling out not just the politicians, but the society that we're tolerating, and this sort of treatment towards Mother Earth and the people that live closest to her and protect her the most, which are indigenous people, and the treatment of them. If that is something that doesn't make you want to do something, then I don't know what will, because I think that radicalism is not turning cheek away from something that's the truth. And that the truth is that people are going hungry, which is so weird. It's unbelievable to fathom, because like I mentioned, the Amazon is just so lush and so large. And I also wanted to mention on a little bit of a brighter note that not to make it a brighter note, but just to say that Sonia Guajara, which was the first Brazilian indigenous woman that was appointed recently by Lula as head of the Ministry of Indigenous People. So that's a huge thing. But she was quoted saying, I'm gonna read it off here, that she called for, quote, holding previous government accountable for allowing the situation with the Yanomami people to get worse, to the point where we find adults weighing as much as children, and children reduced to skin and bones, end quote. And I wanted to bring up that situation, that situation, because I think that as we gather here, like Kelly had pointed, and like we're saying, like sometimes being uncomfortable, it's not about wanting to make people feel uncomfortable, but it's about feeling what someone else or what Mother Earth may feel, even if it's for a brief moment, so that it makes us more human. Because I think more and more with news and with screens, we're forgetting what it is to want and to call for a child to have clean water, or a child to have a plate of food. And for me, that's where humanity starts, is wanting to take care of our children and our elders. It's what makes us human. It's what makes us people. I also wanted to bring up the Machigangi people of Peru, and how they're still, Madre de Dios Peru, and how they're still living their traditional ways. And there are still people out there, many communities still, that are living their traditional ways. And I think it is our responsibility to try to preserve that and try to protect those waters. When I went there, that's where I visited, I was able to still eat the fish from those waters and drink the water from those rivers, and it was the cleanest water that I had ever drank before. And I think that even though it is really protected and really pure, I think that the impacts of cities and the impacts of fish farming and all these things are going to make it less and less protected. So I think that it's a huge priority to make sure that we're not just like calling out the things that are happening that make our heart break, but also realizing the places that are still pristine and that also need our attention and our support. And also radical for me, I'm gonna keep going because I think that there's so many people that can inspire all of us in this room. But radical for me are also the grandmothers of Big Mountain in Arizona, when Peabody Coal Company came and illegally occupied their territories. And the grandmothers, yes, I would clap for the grandmothers, because the grandmothers, what they said was, Curator is the only one that could relocate me. And I think that really, for me, that is the epiphany of radical. You're not going to let anyone, no company, no matter the money, take you away from your traditional homelands. So I wanted to say that out. And then lastly, radical for me is working with children. And I didn't mention this in my intro, but in Ecuador, what I've been doing I've been working in a school. It's not called the Green School, but it pretty much is. 3 out of the 4 classrooms are outdoors. And the children that I teach, or that we teach, there's 4 teachers. They're 3 to 9. And I think that for me has brought me like the most joys in recent years, because I've been working with children for a long time, but I haven't ever been working in a school like so closely with a school. And I think that seeing the children in nature, and that's why I was really happy to be part of this conference, because this is exactly what this conference is about, right? Seeing children learn with nature and literally like hear monkeys in the background, like while they're in school. Like, it's been really powerful because it makes me remember why I do this and why we're here and what I need to do, what I need to continue to do. And also children for me are the ones that like probably teach me the most, because they're happy with what they have, and they are also very accepting of everyone regardless of where you're at or who you are or how you look. And yeah, I think that all of that is for me radicalism. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maya. That was so great, and thank you, Tyler, as well. I want to touch upon a few things that really bring together my identity as a person of indigenous descent who navigates spaces and systems that are very much designed by people who are non-indigenous. And so I think that for me and for really all of us here, but specifically the Black and brown people and indigenous people in this room, being right here seated is radical. Like, it is radical for you to be here. And I want to acknowledge that. I think that for me, something that is very radical is to speak up. To speak up, to speak my truth, and to tell my stories, to be the owner of my own narrative. I don't think anybody else is going to tell my story as best as I can say it, as best as my grandma can say it, as best as my family can say it. It is just not going to happen. And it's not going to happen because we don't sugarcoat nothing, you know. And so I realized, you know, going to school in the Midwest, and not to call out anybody who's out here from the Midwest, but y'all know that in the culture really in the Midwest is it's a bit conflict avoidant. And it's a bit of like that Midwesternized. I don't know how that's out here. I don't know how that's out in New York. Like, that's, I'm speaking from my perspective, like specifically going to school for undergrad and graduate school in Iowa and Illinois. And to me, you know, something that was very radical was definitely speaking up and standing up to the profs, especially because a lot of those professors that were teaching me were not Black, were not brown, were not indigenous, and yet we were here learning African American history, for example, or like about the African diaspora, or like we were learning about indigenous people in South America. And I was like, bro, but like, how much do you actually know about that? Like, I respect the academia. I have a degree. I have a master's degree, right? I don't know if I will ever get a PhD. I respect the academia, and we know that. But being, you know, especially, and I know there are many teachers here in the room too, you know, being a teacher is that you always continue to learn. And just like Maya is saying, you know, and Maya being also a teacher, children and the people that you're teaching also teach you a lot back, you know. And so for me, a lot of the times being radical in school was speaking my truth. And whenever I saw some type of stereotype, some type of misrepresentation, I called it out. And I was like, bro, like, that's not how like brown people are. Like, that's not because I'm, you know, like from Costa Rica, I think this way. Like, I'm not lazy. I don't lay at the beach all the time. Like, I wish, you know. And so, because like that was the thing, you know, I was like, oh, I'm from Costa Rica. And it's like, oh my God, you must lay at the beach all the time. And I was like, I really wish. I mean, like, can you guys get me that? Like, no, it's not like that, you know. So this is like a funny story, but a lot of the times things were really hurtful. You know, a lot of the times what really, really hurt me a lot as well was that my peers, a lot of the times, very much a white classroom, came to me when I stood up to a prof after class and said, oh my God, I really wanted to say that. Oh my God, I'm so thankful that you said it. Please, if you're a person like that, do not. Like, if you see that there is one person in the room who may be minoritized in this room, and something is being said, that Black or brown indigenous person in the room does not need to call the other white person in the room. You can do it as an ally. You know, what you're doing, you know, what you're doing by coming to this person and saying, oh my God, thank you, you said it, you know. And we saw, Maya and I experienced that, you know, very recently in other spaces. And what that is called is performative activism. I don't need no performative activism. I don't need no fakes in my life. Period. That's how I was brought up, and that's how I will pass it on. In my friendships, in any relationship I have, you show up as fake, I'm like, I'm seeing through you, bro. Like, what are you talking about? You know, like you talking kiki with me right now, and then you go the other room and it's like, and you be complicit with somebody who's from your same ethnic group. How is that radical? So when I think about radical, you know, for me as a BIPOC person, I think I have to speak up. When I'm thinking about people who are not BIPOC, I'm thinking you have to also speak up. You have to stand up. You have to call people out. Like that is radical for you. You know, you have to know that. You don't have to come to the BIPOC people and be like, oh my God, what can we do? Like, what? Like, you know, no. What do you mean? Like, no. Don't ask me what you can do. You know, like, do your research. You know, like, what are the sources of information that you're reading? You know, and specifically here, again, in the context of teachers, I think that that's also really critical and really radical. Who are you teaching about? If you read about something, who is this person? Like, again, you know, I had a lot of anthropology classes in my school, and we know that anthropology, as many other disciplines, is very much dominated by whites. And I just want to let that sink. Because for me, also in Costa Rica, it's like really interesting when somebody comes to our communities and it's like, oh my God, can we stay here for like a month and do some research? I'm like, I don't go to New York City. I don't go and like do some research in Brooklyn. You know, like I don't show up to the White House and be like, oh, hey, like Biden, Trump, can I like do some research here and like live with you guys for like a month? Like, do you guys see that? Like, do people really see that? Am I right? Right? Like, I don't know, you know. To me, it's just like a thing, you know, it's like we really are not people that need to be studied. We are not, you know, like we are happy to share our learnings, but you guys should really start. I mean, from that other side, you know, like if you study Black and Brown Indigenous history, who is teaching and who is researching and learning on white history? And what is that history about? I think that as a teacher, that is something that is very radical to do. And that is something that as a kid, I wish that was done in school. It was done in my home. When cuando entraba a mi casa, you know, when like I went into my home, that was done. But the moment that I stepped out, that was the complete opposite. And I'm talking from a country that is very much mixed raced. And yet we still have, I mean, and this is our perspective as indigenous people, that we endure 300 years of colonization and then we continue to endure 200 years of oppression. Right? And so I think that radical too is knowing what is the law, what's the paper, but what's actually happened. I think radical is to, again, as a teacher, as a leader, really in any context, that if you are the person responsible for that space, you cannot afford not to take a position when somebody is being mistreated. You can't. And I had that so many times. I was like, why is even the prof saying this? You know, like I have many relatives from many of the Pacific Islands, many of the large ocean nations, and many of my dear friends really are from these countries and these realities, and they speak about what it means to go underwater. And I had this class for my undergrad, which was my seminar for political science, and we were studying. The topic of the seminar was justice. And so at that moment, we were reading a book about climate change. And so the topic was specifically about Palau. And so the professor posed the question saying, so what do you think these people can do as far as like adaptation and mitigation? And literally one person said, I think they could like build houses underwater. And everybody in the room laughed. And I went off. I read the professor, I read the students, you know, the class ended, I still kept going, somebody got up and wanted to leave. I said, you sit down until I'm done, you know, like, because, you know, so like that's radical, right? I think like for me, again, I think it's been touched upon in yesterday's plenary and today already, that love is also very radical. And I think that when you really think about something or like some topic that is being discussed, there is always a face to it. Like there, you see a page in front of you. You see maybe a screen, but there is always a face to it. There is always a community to it. Yeah. So for me, that's very important, to be radical. And I think that, and here to close this part about being radical, and how I see being radical as a person who is of indigenous descent versus how I think people who are non-BIPOC could see it, is that we all navigate spaces of white supremacy. We all do. And I think that if you all have had the chance to read My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, you should read it again. If you have not, you should really read it, because Resmaa Menakem is talking about white supremacy in the body. And that, sometimes for me, coming from my degree in diplomacy, which, I try to exercise, I hope you can see that. I should go back. But I do indigenous diplomacy. It's a different diplomacy. So, just here, again, to be closing. So, when we talk about white supremacy is also felt in the body. Somebody who is a white supremacist doesn't exactly need to be a white person. I mean, a lot of times, yes, it is. But like the principles and ideas of white supremacy can also reside within BIPOC people. And I also call that out, Like, I think coming from Costa Rica, there is a lot of anti-blackness. There is a lot of colorism. And I call that out. I'm like, bro, like, you are literally, like, of black descent. What are you talking about? Like, you are, like, indigenous. What are you talking about? So I think that, so I think that, again, finally here, to love your body, and to know that white supremacy really lives within us all, and that it affects your body. Somebody who has these ideas about mistreating somebody else probably doesn't treat their family well, probably doesn't treat their children well, So know that is a thing, and that we all deal with it.
Hello. Thank you for that. Yeah, that was beautiful. I think all of my colleagues said it perfectly. Radicalism comes in so many different forms. And there's so many different ways that it can show up, right? So as we were talking, as one of the things that like Tyler was saying is, as an ally, if you have the resources, if you're sitting at the table, and when I say ally, I'm talking you white folks, right? If you have the seat at the table, being radical for you is taking a step back and allowing somebody that looks like us to step forward. Being radical is being in this space and listening to things that might make you feel uncomfortable, might challenge some of the values and ideas that you grew up with. It's radical to change your mindset for the better. I think it's also, as Tony was saying, it's really radical as well for, I think if our white allies could take away anything from this, is that it's radical to be truthful, to really own and take accountability for history and for what is currently happening. Yes. One of the things that Tony was mentioning was, the performative activism. I hear very often from white allies, they separate themselves from their culture. They say, oh, I'm not like those white people, or I don't agree with their opinions. And all you're doing is dividing more and more and more, when you really could be leaning in on those people that are in your culture that don't have the same values as you, and really trying to show them why you have the values you have, convincing them and influencing them to be better people, to really lean into the environment, to take care of the environment, because I truly believe that we all care about this earth. It just is really going to take us all working together to create solutions that are tangible and that last forever, right? Long-lasting solutions. We've had these solutions come up in the past that we've tried, and usually they don't last very long, or they go out of style or not as effective anymore because there was no diverse opinions invited to the table for those solutions. It was one group of people, usually white men, right, making that decision. And when it doesn't work, instead of saying, hey, we were wrong and we made a mistake. They just double down on their actions. So I really think being radical is being able to admit the truth, being able to say the truth out loud and know the truth inside of your own mind first. And with that also, I think, we talked about self-love a lot. Being radical is loving yourself, you guys. Like, man, I cannot express that enough. In these spaces, when we're activists, when we're fighting for change, like, we get drained. Right? We give so much of our energy, so much of our time, so much of our passion to other causes besides ourselves. And so if you sat in a session with me yesterday, you might have heard me say this, but I have this thing that I like to call a theory. I call it the air mask theory, right? When we're on an airplane, the flight attendants tell you to put your mask on first before helping anybody else. The reason being, because if you run out of air, if you run out of oxygen, you're not going to be able to assist anybody else. And so radicalism is really loving yourself first, putting yourself first, because we know that women, especially who are one of the main audiences for the environmental movement, one of the main activists is women identifying people. And women are also historically the ones that put others before themselves. So I really want you guys to walk away with, thinking, what am I willing to give to this movement? And what am I not willing to give? Set those boundaries for yourself and put up, protect your energy. Put up boundaries to protect your energy and protect yourself, especially as BIPOC women, especially queer, especially our folks with invisible and visible disabilities. Make sure you're putting yourself first. That's radical to me.
Thank you all once again. So we have about, I think, 12 or 13 minutes left. We have a couple more questions that our panelists are going to answer, and then if we have any time left, we'll do a Q&A. So Tyler, I'm going to give you this question, and then I'll pass the last question to some of the other panelists. Tyler, do you have a relationship with nature? How did you establish it? And how does that relationship guide your activism?
Yeah, so I guess the blanket answer there is yes, I do have a relationship with nature. I probably wouldn't be here otherwise, right? My relationship with nature really grew to be a spiritual and unifying one for me. But this relationship really started with my family. And specifically my maternal elders who taught me at a young age in the Bronx how to cultivate seed all the way to maturity. And as you could imagine, it's not a very easy thing to do in a concrete jungle. I wish I actually had pictures up here that I could show you guys, but maybe we can rendezvous afterwards to talk about it if y'all are interested. So they really taught me these lessons and passed on these wisdoms. And funny enough, the other side of farming is learning how to cook. Like, how many of y'all in this room can cook? Don't lie to me. How many? This is actually kind of what I imagine in my head. Half of y'all can cook, the other half can't. But it's okay, y'all. We can teach each other. But it was really fascinating to see how I could really, germinate a seed, mature, and then, straight cooking and, feeding my soul, my body, and also just not myself, but that of my community. That is something I can never forget and a lesson that I will always cherish from my grandmother and my great-grandmother. But that being said, my relationship with the land, it really taught me the nature of reciprocity and regeneration and its criticalness in times like this. They made me really reflect deeply on how we're always taking from the earth. And a big part of agriculture is how we're taking, how are we harvesting without ever thinking about how are we giving back? How are we expressing gratitude to Mother Earth, to the ancestors that have once tended to these lands and have left it up to us to steward to continuity into continuity. So, as we leave, please think on that because, that's critical. But I was also raised in a family that did not own the world. They were not wealthy. They were not rich. But they still always found a way to give back to Earth and to our local communities. And I will also never forget those lessons. As a matter of fact, they guide my activism up until this very point. So that being said, I understood from a young age I came from a people that living off of the land was literally their way of survival. Now it's my pathway to liberation, to justice, and to collective economic security. And I feel like I feel like that message resonates with a lot of Black folks in the community, particularly Black farmers. Land is our power. I'm not the first person to say this, literally, specifically for people who have been consistently and historically displaced. Historically and consistently displaced. We don't even have all the time to get into that, but I think we know what I'm talking about. We're talking about the plantation. We're talking about the reservation. So really reconciling these histories, it requires a deep, deep level of emotional maturity, but we once again have to be willing to engage in these conversations. And I mean, as Renee said yesterday, conflict has to be our love language, right? Come on. But yeah, thank you, Kels.
Thank you for that, Tyler. And before we get to our Q&A, one more question for you, Emmy. Do you think that in today's day and age, in the 2020s, that youth, adults, people generally have a relationship with nature still?
Wow, that's a great question. So we do know that statistically that adults, youth are spending more time on technology than they are in nature. These are facts. And so I don't believe that right now we have the connection with nature that we used to. A lot of times we say we're going outside, right? And we're just walking on concrete. And that's not really nature. Yes. So I don't believe we have the same connection that we used to, but I do believe that we can get back to that point with, things like this. I'm really appreciative that this conference was in Estes Mountains. That's one of my favorite places in the world, and it's just a beautiful scenery to really immerse people. We also are aware that you gave out scholarships for this, and so, the accessibility to the nature too is also just incredible. I think if I wanted to leave a message with our adults in the room, because there's not too many youths unless I'm a youth, but I'm an adult youth. And so I think the message that I really want to leave with our elders, our older folks, our seasoned youth, whatever you prefer to be called, is to remember that children are like sponges. They mirror everything that you do. Whether you think it's true or not, whether you have kids or not. Children in your community are watching what you're doing every single day, and that's how they're learning how to be adults. And one of the things that as adults that we forget to do is to learn from children, is to be like children. So we're often telling them, have this connection to nature, go outside and play. But are you going outside and play? When was the last time you've been outside to play? I really want the adults in this room to take away the message of just embrace your child wonder about Earth. Go outside and touch dirt. Make mud pies again. Throw mud pies at your friends. They'll probably hate you, but it's fine. Do something with the environment. Touch the grass. Smell the flowers. Really breathe in the fresh air and be a child again. Play outside with all your senses and then lead by example. Because if you're able to touch nature and learn from nature, your children will be able to touch nature and learn from nature too.
Great, thanks, Em. So first, just thanks to each of you. You are my family, and I am very proud of that and very honored, extremely honored. And we have about 5 minutes left, so if folks want to raise their hand in the audience, and these guys will pick out who they want to speak to.
We start back. Can we just get a giant round of applause? Let's wake up and holy hell. I think we are honored to be in such company today. Thank you for sharing your stories, your wisdom, your power with us. It's great. We have time for like maybe 2 questions, so you better make them good. I see you right here. Pink glasses.
Thank you so much for all of your experiences and wisdom and values that you shared. Tony already shared a book that he recommends that we all read, but I would love to hear a book from each of you that you recommend that relates to this idea of being revolutionary, coming back to our sense of self or our sense of Mother Earth.
So I'm not much of a book reader, but I do have a book I can offer up.
We're also going to take notes.
Yeah, we're going to take notes. That's what I was going to tell you guys. We're going to take notes about which books we recommend, and then we'll send them to the audience after. One of the books I recommend is, just lost it. Let me go last, actually. Here you go.
Okay, cool. So a book that I would recommend, I don't know if anyone's read it yet, it's called The Anarchy. Any history lovers in here? Yes. So basically it's just a book about, British colonialism and imperialism in India and how that impacted the rest of the world, the rise of corporations, monopolies. I think it's a really good book to read if you want a historical context, behind capitalism and how we got to where we are today. It's really good. Please read it. The Anarchy. Cool? Yeah.
I have 3 books. The first one was that trip that I mentioned when I went to Bolivia. I bought it there, and I read it over and over again. It's called, in English, it's called Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano, who's an Uruguayan writer. He started as an economist and then left that and became a writer, and I highly recommend the book. We're going to make a list, but it's called Open Veins of Latin America. Then second book, I forgot his name. I think it's something Brown, but it's called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And I think that if you live in this country, you need to read that book. I recommend that. And then the third book, oh my God, I'm forgetting it. No, the third book that I would recommend, I remember it. Sorry. It's another Galeano book, but it's called Memory of Fire, and it's a collection of stories. A lot of Galeano's books are collections of stories, but Memory of Fire is short stories, like snippets of stories from the Americas. So he starts the book with the Taino people because that's where Christopher Columbus put the ship and started colonization. And then it's just a collection of memories and stories that he's heard and has been shared with him of different nations throughout the Americas. Another book, sorry, I have 4, I guess. Last one, sorry. Lakota Woman, I think it's a really, really great book. I just read it recently, but I forgot the author of that one too. No, you know which one is really, really great? Sorry. All right, I'll stop. But one more. I'll send it to. No, I just want to say. Okay, yeah. It's Crow Dog's book, but I think it's really, really powerful. Okay, I'll stop there. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks to my lovely best friend, I remember the name of the book. It's The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. If you guys have ever read it, it's about a really young boy in Africa that literally built a wind turbine out of trash, out of absolutely nothing. He took bare minimum resources and innovated climate change solutions. So yeah, that's definitely a good read. Great question.
Great question. Thank you, for sure. And we'll definitely share this after with the organizers, so hopefully that can also go on the Huba app somewhere. So I have also a few. So the one that I said when we were speaking, My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, I think everybody should read that book. I think All About Love by Bell Hooks should be absolutely read. Like I bought the book, I read it twice, and now I'm giving it away to one of my really dear friends. And so, literally buy it, pass it along. It literally needs to be read. And then the two other books are in Spanish. So if you speak Spanish or are proficient in the language, they are really great. One is called Única Mirando al Mar. That's a half true, half fictional novel, which speaks about the environmental movement in Costa Rica and then also other realities in the country. And then the other one is called Mamita Yunay, which is specifically talking about the plantations, so banana plantations in Costa Rica. So as we know, the history as well of the United Fruit Company and other plantation companies, banana producer companies in Central America was quite huge. And that is speaking also to some of those inequalities and what that brought to the country. Yeah. Mamita Yunay. So Yunay como, so Yunay, so Mamita you all know, right? Mamita, and then Yunay, ¿cómo se dice? Y, so Y-U, so Y-U-N-N-A-A-E, I think I said it right. Yunay. Como United States, pero Yunay. ¿Lo agarraste? Sí, okay.
Okay, so that'll be our last question. I'm just going to add two books to that. My Life is My Sundance by Leonard Peltier. I think everyone should read that book. And Bell Hooks' book, All About Love. And then I'm going to pass it to Emmy real quick, and then we're going to close up.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. Yeah, we love Bell Hooks over at Earth Guardians, so definitely anything by her is amazing. We want to thank you guys for joining us. As you can tell, we love to talk. So do not hesitate to come up to us after this and ask us any questions that you have. We'd be more than happy to connect with you and network with you. One thing that I want to leave with, that if you guys resonate with our mission, our mission being that we empower youth in the intersections of the climate justice movement. And that right now we are going through a theory of change where we are prioritizing tokenized and marginalized communities and not just putting them on stage as we are, but actually putting them in seats of decision making and positions of power and providing opportunities that we wouldn't otherwise else have. Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, we should snap for that. Let's go. Thank you guys for that. So if you resonate with our mission, you can get involved by having, as an adult, you can support a youth in starting a crew. Our crews do on-the-ground projects in their communities all over the world, so there's no limit on where a crew can be. And you can help your youth at schools, in your community, anywhere, start these crews. And then we will give them resources, guidance, and mentorship on doing those on-the-ground projects, as well as even micro project grants, mini project grants. And then another way you can support is by donating. We are a nonprofit, so we do support our youth staff solely on donations. And so if you feel called to, we would love if you could go to our website, earthguardians, with an S, .org. And that is where you can start a crew or donate or just learn more about what we do and find our emails to connect with us. Because as I said, we would love to connect with all of you. This movement is going to take all of us. So we hope that, we can do it together with you guys. Thank you all.